Hey everyone, we're coming up to the end of the year and I hope you're setting your intentions for the coming year and also focusing on lightening your load, focusing on what's not worked, what doesn't serve you, and trying to release it before we conclude this year. Welcome to episode 97 of the Sleep Whisperer podcast, and I'm speaking with a friend, Bastian Groiss. Bastian worked as a project manager within the corporate world in Germany. After moving to New Zealand, he left the corporate world and dived into spiritual work, traveled Australasia, studied permaculture, regenerative agriculture, and much more. He has been working as a dog trainer for the last 9 years, and after struggling with fatigue and exhaustion for a year, he decided that he had had enough of feeling tired and committed to being healthy, energetic, and vital. That journey eventually led him to discover light and circadian rhythms, and years of research and personal exploration eventually led to the birthing of the app Circadian, the why and how of circadian rhythms, and a natural lifestyle. He is currently in the process of fully committing himself to this project and being an ambassador for natural light and a circadian lifestyle in tune with nature. We can never conclude speaking about circadian rhythms. In this episode, we go into how indigenous tribes adjust sleep through seasons, what happens when you take people out of an artificial environment. Does light set biological clocks and regulate hormones and endocrine function? If so, what does this say for professional researchers and sleep coaches who believe that people have different sleep chronotypes? We also have 2 free codes to give away for the app itself. If you want to be that winner to unlock the paid version of the app, leave the show a review and send me an email on deepa@5tothrive.com. Sleep is quite complex, which was my takeaway from this conversation. When we look through every narrow view into sleep, it's a folly and an injustice to those struggling with sleep. While we need research in this space, we also need to open ourselves to the possibility that protocols beyond our lens can be effective. My intention for you is that you get as much knowledge as is required by you to shift sleep challenges and reach a space where your vision for yourself may be manifested through optimal sleep and a vibrant day. Hey everyone, I'm Deepa, light functional medicine practitioner, author and yogini, and you're listening to the Sleep Whisperer podcast, the only sleep podcast with conversations and meditations. I'm on a mission to share profoundly insightful sleep conversations with global visionaries that merge together functional medicine and ancient wisdom. Breathe in bliss through weekly guided meditations and let yourself enter the land of dreams. Together, let's unravel the pieces, get to the roots, and understand the right tools to transform your sleep completely. Through this podcast, I want you to dream the best version of yourself. It's time to regain hope and begin your sleep journey. Bastian, welcome to the Sleep Whisperer podcast, and I know this is also going to be one of those very inspiring conversations which many people will end up sharing because there's so much attention we are bringing to challenging aspects, a lot of confusion out there, and definitely a lot of people speaking about how they are the night owl these days and making that into the way they rule their lives. So I know that we want to get specifically into certain aspects of season, how to adjust sleep through seasons, but also the broad circadian aspect as well. And I know that I have really enjoyed just a couple of days that I've had access to the Circadian Life app that you've created. I've enjoyed everything about it. I still haven't gone really deep, and I know I need some guidance from you about that, but we'll get into the app a little later. What made you create this app? Because you are somebody who's told me that you believe we are nowhere where we need to be in terms of awareness of circadian rhythm, the importance of it in every aspect of our life. So what actually prompted you to go down that route?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. First of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I just need to think really about back like way longer, because like about 10 years ago, I read a book about dog training. And when I was reading that book, it was like an epiphany. It really struck me. I was just basically going, why does not anyone know about it? Why didn't I know about this when I was growing up and having dogs? And that back then inspired me to become a dog trainer, which is kind of 10 years ago. And a similar kind of process really occurred probably like 4 years ago or 3 years ago, when I came across circadian rhythms and I came across light for the first time. And I was struck again in a similar way. I was like, why haven't I never heard about this? This seems so important and so foundational for health and life, really. And I just stumbled across it because I was struggling with my own health. Yeah, and I was looking for dietary help. I was just pretty much, I'm not sure if I had adrenal fatigue, but I was pretty much like tired all the time for about a couple of years. And at some stage, I just, I had enough of it. I just wanted to change. I wanted a difference. I wanted to feel different. I wanted to experience life differently. And that led me down a health journey or health quest or health search. And I started to do some nutritional changes, which had some impact. And but I was kind of hungry for more. I think I wanted something else. I kind of knew there was something else or something more. And I think when I came across circadian rhythms and light, it just literally, light went on inside of me, and I was just really like fascinated, and that really triggered a continuing kind of quest and searching and diving deeper into that for many years. And basically I was just first of all, I was trying to understand what circadian rhythms are and how they work in us. I was trying to understand what light is and how that impacts us. And how it all ties to nature and how it makes sense overall, like what is health and what defines health and what doesn't. And I guess all the consequence of all of that research eventually led me to the idea of creating an app, because similar like with when I was reading about dogs and how to communicate with dogs, I wanted to kind of have other people have that knowledge and have that experience. And the same thing really kind of, I guess, triggered the initial impulse of I need to kind of bring that out to people. I need to share it with more people, because there is not much good information out there about circadian rhythms, in particular on light. It's really under the radar, unfortunately, while it is one of the most fundamental aspects to health and life, which is quite bizarre to me. So I guess the app was born out of that impetus. And the main reason behind it is really, I guess, creating awareness and helping people learn about it, but also implementing a lifestyle that I guess is more natural to our biology and is more in sync with nature.
Lovely, Bastion. And I must ask you this, of course, because I mean, you mentioned when you read a book about dog training. So what did that book actually have to say about light or circadian rhythm that brought your attention to? Because that sounds fascinating to me as well.
Well, there was no connection there. It was just another, I guess I just was reminded of a prior time in my life where I had an insight and I recognized something, or I came across something that seemed so that makes so much sense, that was so basic and resonated and rang true on so many levels, but I hadn't heard about it before. And then the same thing happened again when I came across circadian rhythms initially, and light in particular. Light, I feel like, had a much stronger impact on me, and spiked more interest than circadian rhythms. But it's so, closely woven into each other that it's almost like impossible to separate.
Yes, absolutely. And when you said I hadn't really heard about it, circadian rhythm is actually the core aspect of Ayurveda. So it's been a part of so many ancient teachings that it's, I think, the original circadian medicine, which is why it's so concerning that people have moved so far away from that. And before we jump into talking about how do we adjust sleep through seasons, and you had some fascinating remarks to me about indigenous people and how they adjust sleep. I do want to also ask you your opinion, because there is, the hugely popular book by Dr. Michael Breus, the sleep doctor, called The Power of When, where we're cast into these different sleep chronotypes, supposedly to have different circadian rhythms. And a lot of people bring attention to this. I see a lot of social media posts by very, very renowned practitioners who speak about the different sleep chronotypes, how we are meant to be the morning lark or the night owl, or whatever names each person is calling these different chronotypes. And of course, this is so far away from the Ayurvedic belief that there's no such thing. But two aspects to this. First of all, do you feel that there is a genetic component to this? Because a lot of people talk about each of us having different genetic sleep chronotypes, that we are meant to be a certain way based on our genes. And that's how, when we harness this, if I'm meant to be a night owl, for example, I can harness that different timing to be my most efficient, my most productive. And I'm not going to actually share what are my thoughts in this episode. I think I've done a lot of that, but I'd like to get your thoughts on whether you truly believe that we all have different sleep chronotypes.
I could make it simple. I could answer it with one word, but let's unpack it a little. It feels like. So first of all, let's start very, very basic. We humans, our species, is the only species that tries to live by an artificial kind of schedule. There's no animal, no plant, no organism that is not governed by the day and night cycle. And with the advent of the light bulb by Edison, that started to change, because suddenly we were able to make the night day. And it feels like the chronotypes, and obviously there's the increase in artificial illumination is growing exponentially, which so many effects. And it feels like one of the effects of that bombardment of artificial light and the constant, particularly at night, but also during the day, has a profound impact on our biology. And it really shifts our rhythm, and it alters our hormonal profile in massive ways. And then the longer that carries on, I think the more then people look at what I see as the symptoms of an artificial lifestyle as a justification for living an artificial lifestyle, and then making that natural, and then talking about its genes as particularly in the epigenetic field that Bruce Lipton kind of started to shed so much light on. It becomes clearer and clearer that the environment switches on and switches off genes. The environment dictates what's happening in our bodies. And yes, there is some transgenerational genetic passing on for sure, but that's very minimal. That's nowhere near as big or impactful to the extent that we believed it to be like decades ago. It becomes clearer and clearer that the environment literally kind of shapes and turns on and off genes, and thus impacts our behavior and our physiology in big ways.
I love the differentiation you brought, Bastian, about genetics and epigenetics in this context, because I don't think people have actually thought of it in this context. And it's so strange now that you mention it. I can't actually think, I mean, if you're saying that genetics makes us a night owl, that's like saying our genetics predisposes us towards diabetes, so why not just get diabetes, right? So it's something like that. And I'm so glad. I actually haven't thought about it in this manner at all. So thank you for that differentiation. And I also wanted to ask you, because
just one more thing to that, because I just the other day I just came across a paper which talked about, or which looked about ADHD.
Right.
And it because a lot of people who suffer from ADHD or who have ADHD, they tend to be much more active in the evening. And it's again, it's kind of the notion, how do we look at things? Because again, people who have ADHD and who show that behavior would argue that that's their natural kind of rhythm, or that's kind of when they're active and when they perform better, and there's less stimulation from the outside, and they can focus more on the things they're doing, so that's why they tend to be more productive. But it's really interesting how that paper looked at it more from the point of view and basically asked the question whether ADHD is just a symptom of circadian disruption and sleep disorders rather than the other way around. Yeah, so it's another good example where we often confuse a symptom with a cause, and then we try to justify it and try to work around it rather than actually addressing the root cause, which in that case is much more likely circadian disruption. Because I think, if I remember the figures correctly, I think it was like 78 to 87% of adults who have ADHD suffer from circadian disruption chronically.
And I think even if we don't bring attention to their being productive, Bastian, I do know, because I have a very dear friend and a colleague who works with children with special needs, and most of the children with ADHD or autism, they do suffer from terrible sleep, the inability to fall asleep, the inability to sustain sleep, and they're just tossing and turning. So even if we don't bring our attention to productivity, I think just looking at the sleep aspect of that is a great way to clean up whether their light is in order, or whether, so because oftentimes I would think in that kind of a situation, they're not going to be conscious about keeping the lights off, maybe the lights on all through the night, so that can severely disrupt their circadian rhythm for the future. But I think I don't want to digress, because I do want us to, and before we just jump into the full conversation, I should mention when we had Rudy on the show from Viva Race, and he mentioned that, one of the justification that is made in terms of someone being a night owl is if they've been studied and the endocrine system has been studied, they've actually found that melatonin releases much later in their bodies, and asked Rudy about this, and he said it's because it's linked to light. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have a different rhythm where melatonin is released. So obviously, if they're exposed to light later than someone else, their melatonin release is going to be clearly in juxtaposition along with when they're exposing their eyes to darkness. So just to get your brief thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have the same view, and it kind of ties into I can't remember the name of the paper, but basically which ties us to the other question you were asking earlier, kind of the seasonal kind of changes, because melatonin secretion in winter in traditional people is longer. So the extent of the melatonin secretion, extend with longer darkness, and hence you sleep longer. So it's a natural effect that if we are in line with day and night and the shifts over the seasons within that, then naturally we sleep longer in winter and we sleep less in summer.
And I want to spend a lot of time here, Bastian, because there is a lot of emphasis in the sleep practitioner community that compared to daylight savings and trying to use a light box in winter to reduce the number of hours you sleep, or I'm not quite sure how. I think each of them have different spin on this, but let's talk a little bit more about this, because what you said is clearly important. And you mentioned to me how indigenous tribes, they just naturally adjust their sleep based on these seasons. So what actually happens in the traditional setup, and do you feel that we just need to be listening then to our bodies and sleeping more in the winter?
Well, I guess that would be the ideal scenario, just from a biological alignment and optimizing our biology, really. But we're so far removed from that, unfortunately. This is everything. This I guess we hardly have any contact points to our environment anymore, and we also don't have any or not much awareness to what is happening in nature. Just outside, we live temperature controlled. We constantly switch lights on. It's a bit dark outside, we switch lights on inside. We are cut off from the elements. So there's really hardly any contact that we have. We're not aware. We don't even know. It's actually hard to know, even if you think about it, what's in season, because so much is grown from all over the world. It's shipped all over the world. We don't even know anymore what grows when in our environment.
Absolutely.
And then there's hydroponics, and then there's greenhouses and this and that. So everything is kind of it's almost like hard to remember or to understand what natural means anymore. So again, that's really why I'm so passionate about light and nature exposure in particular, because it creates some more awareness of what's happening in the real world, and it can shift and open up, I guess, a deeper connection, more intimacy with our environment and eventually ourselves. And if we look at, there was a paper, I think it was in 2015, which looked at 3 tribes. I think there were, one was in Southern America, and 2 were in Africa. There was the Hasta and the Sun, and there was another group. And what they basically looked at their activity patterns and their rest patterns, and also the amount of light exposure they received. And they also looked at temperature, which is an interesting observation in that study. So what happened? First of all, they shifted. They didn't shift their wake time, but they shifted their sleep time. So when they went to bed, all these 3 tribes usually rose around daybreak, so way before sunrise. Some rose an hour before sunrise, some a bit closer to sunrise, which kind of stayed similar throughout the seasons. And they went to bed a few hours after the sun set. And an interesting observation that they made is that it it didn't appear necessarily to be the light environment that triggered the sleep onset or the wake time. But what they found is that when the temperature started dropping in the evening, that's kind of what coincided with their sleep onset. And at the same time, in the morning, at the lowest point of the temperature, they started to wake up. So, and as we know, when we look at it, because the temperature cycles, they lag behind the light cycles. It takes, because the stones and the earth and our bodies absorb the energy and absorb the heat, and it takes time, and we radiate that out. The earth radiates that out, and it takes time for the temperature to drop after the sun disappeared. So it's interesting that in that context, they actually found in a natural setting, when people sleep outside, that the temperature change seems to be the actual trigger for the physiological change with sleep and wake. Yet it is driven by light indirectly, because light drives the temperature.
Very interesting. I've never heard of this actually. So what do you think this tells us if we were to make a prediction of somebody who's not in a natural setting? And of course, we're all in an artificial setting, really. So what would we say then? Are we saying that, are we agreeing with people who say light is not, blue light is a myth? Are we saying that temperature is more important than light, or are we saying that it's a bit tricky? I would love for you to break it down clearly for someone who'd really like to get into that.
I mean, it seems to me it seems a real folly to think that light doesn't have an impact. I mean, it drives every organism and the behavior of every organism on this planet. It is the giver of life. Without the sun, there would be no energy, there would be no life. So to think that light doesn't have an impact seems utterly ridiculous to me. The light at night at the same time, day and night is antagonistic, same as the fluctuation of hormones in our bodies antagonistic if we align with that cycle. If we have light after dark, we suppress and delay melatonin. If melatonin is suppressed and delayed, and then in the morning we might sleep in, but it's light outside, and we basically reduce the amount of melatonin that's in our bodies. If we do that, then if it's interesting, if you actually look at what melatonin does, yes, it's a sleep, or so-called sleep hormone, or the hormone of darkness, but it regulates so many other things. It's the most potent antioxidant that we have at our disposal. So just that, if we don't look at anything else, and there's tons more that melatonin does, it's probably the most, what I like to call it, the most powerful hormonal ally that we have. So if we mess with that, we don't do ourselves a favor. And so with regards to the antioxidant, it's basically mopping up and scavenging free radicals. So we're reducing inflammation in our bodies. Yeah, we're reducing oxidative stress in our bodies. We're repairing more damage.
And that's the key to all healing, because that's what supports the diet and everything else. Because without antioxidant activity, you can be doing the best diet and the best exercise, and you'll still be struggling with symptoms and conditions. And I think for women also, I must bring quickly attention to the fact that there's a very deep connection between melatonin and progesterone. So it's almost as if they support each other. So if you're reducing your secretion of melatonin, you're also contributing to lower levels of progesterone, therefore driving estrogen dominance. So there's so many aspects of melatonin. I mean, it's not just sleep for sure.
Yeah, and it's not only, people always think it's in the pineal gland. That's one aspect where it is released, but it's actually synthesized and utilized in the mitochondria itself, like everywhere in our body. There's a huge amount of melatonin in our gut as well. So it's such an foundational hormone that regulates pretty much all the physiological activity that's happening during the night. So to kind of interfere with that is interesting. The thing is, I guess the difficulty is that the science approach we're having is so compartmentalized.
Yes,
it's so looking at so little details here and there, and then we try to draw conclusions about a little study here that tries to isolate one problem, but it cannot possibly look at the big whole, because life is much too complex. Light is much too complex. Our body is much too complex. And just one example for that is, if we get expose our skin and our eyes to the sunlight during the day, particularly in the morning, we actually convert, or UV light to be more precise, converts tryptophan to serotonin, and then serotonin. So we have a higher supply of serotonin, which just not only makes us feel good and is a rewarding compound, and lifts our mood. It also then, there's more serotonin available, which then eventually gets transformed to melatonin, and then melatonin is released when it's dark. So everything is connected, and if people try to cut up,
yes, I agree with you,
look at things in isolation, it's a folly, really.
And on this note, Bastian, I must ask you for your opinion on melatonin supplementation, because I do see a lot of practitioners in the sleep community, and sometimes these are practitioners who actually feel that we're not impacted by blue light, but there is a lot of melatonin supplementation as the right way to get even children to have better sleep. Personally, I don't usually prescribe melatonin to anyone who comes to me, and there's so many other things that need to be cleaned up physiologically. But do you feel that it can play a role in the right context for someone who's struggling with any kind of sleep challenges?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's definitely a place for melatonin subscription or prescription, but it would need to be, from my point of view, it would need to be with a clear aim and for a short kind of period of time, because again, the manifold effects melatonin has in our bodies, and the places it plays a role, it's too much. Again, there's too many aspects we can't, and again, it's a synthesized hormone. It's not the real deal. People tend to forget that. And there are, I can't remember, but I've read a few studies where they looked at melatonin supplementation, and one side effect of it usually is that people feel groggy the next day or the next days, and that kind of carries on, and then they might need to take a stimulant to kind of counter that. And it's not it can be a short-term strategy if it is a sound strategy by someone who knows what they're doing. But I would only go there in a rare case scenario. I would more prefer to kind of, I'm all about the innate intelligence in the body and its ability to heal itself and change once we give the right, epigenetic or environmental kind of input. But I think there's a place for it. I wouldn't say categorically no, but I would definitely more err on the side of only go there if there's no other way.
Beautiful. And you spoke a lot about when the indigenous tribe, and you also mentioned earlier that when someone's in a natural setting, how everything shifts, and there's so many differences based on if you're outside. And I know there's been some research done as well on how when they took night owls to a space where there were no artificial lighting, how they just rewired their whole circadian rhythm in a few days. But what actually happens to all of us when we're taken out of these natural spaces? Because truly I mean, I'm blessed to live in a countryside, but frankly, that's a very small percentage of us who's living like this in nature. Most people are actually right smack in the middle of the city and surrounded by, you really don't know when it's, and of course you brought attention to also the fact that we've forgotten which season we are in, because we've got everything available right through the world all the time. So most of us are moved away from this natural setting. So what's actually happening to us?
Well, it's a good question. Well, in a broad stroke answer, we are dysregulating. We are as weak and as diseased as we have ever been, and it's speeding up, like at a pace that is tremendous. Yeah, we can see it in children. We can see it in the rise of all the modern diseases. They're all going through the roof. It doesn't matter which disease you pick. Autism didn't hardly exist in the 1950s. Now it's, I can't remember, 1 in 30 children, probably more by now. Anxiety, obesity, cancer, diabetes, Parkinson's, every autoimmune diseases, it's all so rampant. And again, if we look at epigenetics, it's a product of our environment, and it's the way we live. And we seem to be kind of geared and sold comfort and convenience, but there is a huge kind of price to pay. And yeah, it's for me, it's really a change in priorities. And that's what happened for me. I made a change in priorities. My health and my vitality was more important than my convenience or my habitual kind of ways. So I guess it's really an individual kind of choice that kind of people have to make. And there's ways to mitigate the artificial world, but if we look at just blue light at night, we can wear blue blockers. Not a big deal. Quite easy to do. It's still a bit socially awkward for people, and it requires a little adaptation, but it's not that difficult. But other aspects of living in the modern world and in the city, like in cities in particular, the amount of stress and the pace of life, the air pollution, the chemicals, the lack of nutrients, the lack of sunshine, the lack of connection, the stimulation from technology, a stressful job, running around, driving around, never stopping. It's so pervasive that it's no wonder that we are kind of literally kind of falling apart on a cellular kind of level. So and then it's really like, what is the priority? Is it more important to go out and have fun and dance the night away? And I guess there's definitely a place for it, but if that's kind of constant, and if that carries on for kind of decades, it's no wonder that we are, as a species, are extremely kind of sick and not vital and not healthy. It's kind of rare to it feels rare to see another human being who is full of life and full of vitality and healthy. And some people look healthy on the outside because they might go to the gym, but they might be falling apart on the inside, on a cellular level.
That is true. And also in today's social media world, you really don't know how anyone looks naturally with the world of filters and so many things that we put in place that we can kind of, I think, sometimes end up convincing ourselves that there's nothing going on. We're living in a total state of denial, I feel. But just to wrap up all of this, because I would like people to have some practical tools. So how can we actually support our sleep moving through seasons, and what do you suggest that we actually do, not just to manage seasons, but on a daily basis? How can we support healthy circadian rhythm in practical ways that is, you think, is a good starting point?
Yeah, I mean that's why we kind of came up with the app to help people to do that. To give people the background and the understanding around why that's really important, and we have more than 1,000 kind of references that's backing up our content, and we're always adding more resources to it so people can really dive in and understand what's happening. So the actual application of it is the other side of the app, like what to do, how should the ideal day kind of look like. And not surprisingly, the ideal day should be governed by sunrise and sunset. So it's almost like a shift from an artificial schedule or a social schedule to a biological schedule. And
that's a beautiful statement, just shifting the schedule from social to biological. Is that what you said? That's beautiful. Yep. That's a great mantra for me, I think.
Yeah, and that really means ideally, getting up with the sun or sometime before sunrise. It's highly beneficial. It's well known in the Ayurvedic traditions that morning movement and morning exercise really important, which also ties in again with circadian rhythms, because it's not only light that it's a primary circadian cue, but movement and food intake are two other very important cues. So ideally in the morning, we get all three kind of cues together, meaning we get the natural light, we go outside, we get the natural light, we get some movement, and then shortly after, that's my light break notification that's going off in the background. And then shortly after rising and some movement, we should take some food in to kind of start the day, to start the clocks in the gut, so that everything is working in harmony. And then during the day, ideally, we go out regularly and get some light breaks. I know we haven't talked much. I would have loved to talk more about light and dive into the details, but maybe we can keep that for another.
I think we still have a little bit of time, so I would like you to talk a little bit about that.
It's just really a lot. So let's maybe keep it really focused for now. And so the big part is really, let's put it in a nutshell. This is the activities during the day when the sun is up, and then kind of winding down, no food intake, maybe a little bit of movement, but not too close to bed. Definitely no vigorous exercise, an hour or so before bed. And so that basically everything can wind down, that the entire physiology can kind of come to a rest. And that's also why we don't want artificial light at night, because blue light just triggers cortisol and adrenaline in us and kind of fires us up. That's why we have that's why the blue spike in the LEDs is so high, to create more productivity during the day. But it's unbalanced nevertheless. But particularly at night, we don't want that stimulation. We want to wind down. We don't want to tax the digestive system. We don't want to tax our heart or any organ really. We want to wind down. So temperature can drop, heart rate can drop, everything kind of shuts down in preparation for sleep. And then during sleep is the repair activities that need to happen. So if we interfere with that, again, similar to the melatonin, which is closely tied into that, if we mess with the repair, then we are less equipped to tackle the next day. And so it's really that symphony. It's almost like the activities or the way you live during the day dictates the quality of sleep you have at night, and then the quality of sleep you have at night dictates how well you do the next day. Which is,
I love
which
that.
is,
I love
really,
that, because I think one of the things that also I see a lot on social posts is trying to box food. For example, one of the examples I would give is when people who are talking about how to improve sleep and they're talking about what to have at dinner because something contains tryptophan, and it's not as, I mean, you can't be, for example, having sugar all day long and then hope to have some tryptophan food at dinner and have excellent sleep. So I truly believe the sleep plate begins at breakfast, and that's what you're saying. It's all interlinked. Every moment is intertwined
yes,
with the other.
it is exactly, and it's really that. I guess it depends really, like, so you can customize the app in such a way that you basically set your start time or your wake time, and you set the time when you want to start eating, and these are the main triggers for your circadian rhythmicity. And then obviously the closer you align that to sunrise, the better off you will be. And there's many things you can do throughout the day and during the night to kind of help you boost that. But really, it's the focus is on the biological schedule, and whether people want to start with getting up closer to the sun, or maybe just starting with regular kind of rise times or regular bedtimes, and not changing that on the weekend, which is another big problem, social jet lag, which is literally jet lag, and to throw your body off to a different time zone each time you do it. Which is circadian disruption, which is akin to shift work.
And many don't realize this as well, because I had a girl who was struggling. She was on so many sleeping medication, including melatonin, CBD, and she was struggling with sleep, and no one had ever, she had been to a lot of practitioners, but no one asked her whether her sleep was different on the weekend, and she was waking up at 11 a.m. on the weekend, and then she was struggling with sleeping all through the week.
Yeah, and it's another example of kind of convenience and comfort, right? We do that as or I guess most people do it. Same with food. Food is such an emotional component. A lot of the food intake, and I know it in myself. When I'm not feeling well, I tend to eat more. Yeah, just to get that goodness, to get some nourishment and to kind of soothe myself. And it feels like it's the same with sleeping. And on the weekends, for example, because people work hard, they have a full life, they're stressed, and they want some goodies. And in this case, it takes the form of sleeping in as a treat.
Which I think it also happens, Bastian, because it's not that they're sleeping more number of hours all the time. It's just that they're sleeping much later into the night on the weekend. So perhaps they're sleeping at 10 p.m. on a weeknight and 1 a.m. on a weekend. So it may not be that they're sleeping more, that they need to just want to lie down. And yes, sometimes I go to bed at the same time all days of the week, but there are days where I may sleep in an hour longer, but I'm not disrupting my bedtime in any way. It's the same right through the week. And one more thing, when you mentioned about this disruption and how circadian rhythms are also tuned into food, I think one of the things that I've noticed is also meal times tend to shift drastically for people on the weekdays and the weekends. So sometimes you'll see them having lunch at 4 in the evening versus noon or 1 o'clock as through the week. And that itself is a form of circadian disruption.
Yes, it's another layer. It's light, food, movement, temperature, obviously as well. These are all kind of important kind of cues, but the main things we can really easily influence is kind of light and food. And so this is really the key points. And I mean, Sachin Panda has done amazing work on time restricted eating, and really making it abundantly clear that the earlier we shift our eating window, the better it is. And we can see that quite simply with the same. If I eat the same meal in the morning at 8 a.m. versus 8 at night, my insulin response is completely different. It's way higher in the evening, and then again triggers the entire metabolism and the digestion, and then I can't sleep well, and I'll gain weight, and
the whole, I mean, there's so many people, practically 9 out of 10 people who come to me are in a pre-diabetic state with insulin resistance.
Which also is triggered by artificial light, particularly at night.
Right.
But blue light in itself drives blood sugar.
I would love for you to just actually take us a little bit through the app. I mean, you mentioned setting a bedtime, setting wake up time, setting your morning meal, but what are the other ways that people can actually use to personalize this for themselves?
These are really the main ways, because these are the only ways that influence your rhythmicity, really. If there's ways to work around it, let's say, if and that's where, for example, you mentioned light boxes before and things like that. So there is a use for artificial light positively. For example, with seasonal affective disorder, SAD, that usually happens in winter when there is less light around, which points to the fact that sunlight creates a hormonal cascade in us. It creates serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, and other compounds which are all really rewarding. If we don't get these, and if there's less light around in winter, we feel more down, we feel more gloom, we don't feel so upbeat. And with a lot of people, that can lead to depression. And then interestingly, what tends to happen with people in depression and anxiety, they tend to stay inside because they're depressed. They don't go outside.
That's
Whereas
true.
actually going outside would support them in feeling better. So it's always there's so many connections, but really with regards to circadian rhythms and in training your rhythm, first and foremost, you don't want to change your rhythm. You want to stick with the same rhythm every day, which is almost like impossible for most people these days. But it's one of the most important ways where you can actually support yourself, because the more predictable things are for your body, the more it can be anticipated, the more the body can get towards it and optimize itself to perform these functions. If it's completely erratic, it's the worst setup, which is also why we don't have the option in the app to have different rhythms at different times of the week. You set your rhythm.
That's a good thing that you pointed out, because someone might see the app and think that why is there no? I'm glad you mentioned that this is a conscious decision.
Yeah, changing your rhythm is the very definition of circadian disruption. Yeah, so it's really people. The idea is to choose something that we give people a suggestion, right? If they go through the onboarding process, they select their wake time, they select when they want to start eating, when they want to stop eating. When we give them a certain recommendation of things to do or when to do it, but really you want to look at, you ideally want to pick one thing that you want to change. Whatever it is that you feel drawn to, whether you just want to have a light break and go outside every 2 hours during the day and just go for a 5-minute walk and get some natural light into your eyes. It might just be that. Then choose that and do that. Forget about the rest. Or maybe you want to go to bed at the same time or rise at the same time, then just do that. And or maybe you want to just, maybe at the moment you Yeah, or maybe, you eat from, let's say, at the moment, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So 12-hour window, which is not ideal. Yeah, so to maybe just try shorten that window from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then maybe a couple of weeks later, you go from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Does
And then
the
maybe
app
you go from
prompt
8 a.m. to
Does the
5
app
p.m.
prompt people to push that needle slowly further and further?
No, at this stage, no. We're still really early. We don't have anything with regards to actual behavioral change in there. It really relies on people to take responsibility and make their own choices, which is actually something that is really close to my heart as well.
Yes.
Because it really feels like the constant guiding people and telling people what to do is not really supportive in the long run. Eventually, each one of us needs to come into their own.
Love it.
And find their own way and their own truth and make their own choices and take responsibility, not just for health, but also for behavior, for emotions, and come to terms with that it's me who is doing it, and there's no one else to kind of blame for that. So that's, again, I would see the benefit of behavioral change elements within the app. But to me, it comes really down to a matter of priority, and really encouraging that priority. And it's a choice people start, if they want to change, they kind of need to start making for themselves at the end of the day.
I love all that you shared, Bastian. Any final things to share with our audience before we wind up?
So I guess in a nutshell, how I would describe the app is the why and the how of circadian rhythms. That's what it's really about, and it's really about shifting more towards the biological schedule and slowly getting out of a societal and artificial schedule. And really, it's about creating a bit more awareness of the natural world and the natural rhythms and our place in it. Because it feels like most of the problems, if not all the problems we have in the world, are tied to our kind of disconnection and our fragmentation and compartmentalization, and almost like believing we are not part of nature and each one of us is separate. And that's so far from the truth. It's not, and if we just look to nature, everything is one ecosystem. There is no separation, and we are not separate from it. So it's really, my heart is really strongly in hopefully encouraging people to find a way back first to nature and then kind of to themselves, so that we can live differently, make better decisions, think more holistically, and less kind of myopically, and learn to enjoy life and create life rather than kind of destroying it, as it feels like what we're doing.
Beautiful, Bastian. And I think you should make your app mantra change your rhythm from sociological to biological, as you mentioned earlier, because it's such a beautiful way that it encapsulates your vision for all of us and our circadian rhythm. And we have a show mantra. I'd like you to complete it for us. If sleep is the new medicine, then how would you complete that?
If sleep is a new medicine, then that's a good one. Let me think about that. Sleep is a new medicine. Then it's still just a subset of the greater picture of life.
I love it. Thank you for your time, Bastian. It was a great conversation, and I think what I really took to heart myself, and I hope that all the listeners do as well, is that of course your motivation to say that we don't want to be again prompting people, because we're already being told what to do at all points in our time. And there's a deep intuitive knowledge within you, and I think that's what I really took away from this. Where can people go and download the app? Because I know that I've done that, and my agenda for the weekend is actually to spend a little time going through the app and getting myself set up. So where can people download it? And of course, I think we will also do some promotions for it as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the best way is to go to our website, which is Circadian, CIRCADIN .life, LIFE. Yeah, you are being redirected to the app stores and the Play Store from there. And interesting is to say that you finished with kind of not prompting people to tell them what to do all the time, which kind of in a funny way is exactly what the app does, right? It kind of comes with alarms and notifications to kind of go, okay, now do this now. But you kind of, hopefully you made a choice to actually do that. And then it should be encouraging rather than annoying.
Yes. I think that's so important, because that does tend to happen with a lot of apps, where I think after a while people just kind of switch it off, and it's almost as if the notification come, but it just doesn't make any sense to you. And that's probably not your intention at all for this.
No, but I feel like that's also related just from personal experience. As long as I tell myself I should do something, it's quite an effort, right? But what happens eventually, in my experience at least, and I think that's true universally, eventually, if it's a kind of a true endeavor, the should shifts into a I want to. Yeah, and that's really my experience, and that's why I feel like the touchstone with nature is so important, because once you experience the elements more, once you experience the sun anymore, once you pay more attention, you will literally feel it viscerally in your body, the impact of that. And once that kind of really kind of hits home, it's not a burden anymore. It's not a should anymore. It's I really want to. And then you can almost eventually kind of get rid of the app, because you're doing it anyway. But I still, use it myself as because there's always things to improve, and I really like the prompts. At the moment, I'm working on, like, every 1.5 hours going outside and going for a little walk, doing a little movement, and really being diligent with that, because it's one of my weak points, where I tend to get distracted with work, and I get carried away, and I forget to look after myself. So there's always room for improvement.
Yes, absolutely, Bastian. And as we spoke before the show, that while I do log off all devices by about 5 p.m. and I'm not accessible by mail, message, phone, anything, I'm completely shut off. But when I wake up in the morning, many times I'm awake by 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. And then that's the time actually that I'm at my productive best. So I'm definitely not making the effort to wait and watch the sunrise and then come into my screen. So I just keep my screen on night mode. I wear blue light blockers, but I do jump into work, because for me, that's the most productive time. And I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but Joshua Rosenthal, who was on the show a while ago, and we spoke about circadian rhythms and thyroid health, and he did mention one thing I learned from Josh was that I would end up wearing blue light blockers and putting my screen on night mode only in the evenings. And he said anytime that it's not natural light, if you're sitting in the dark and you're using your screen, you still need to do all of this to avoid endocrine impact, which taught me a lot. So now I'm conscious that while I would start early. And you spoke about the sun break. I actually climb out onto my roof and I lie down on my roof. Nice. And catch the sun every couple of hours. We're not all blessed with that, but I think we can definitely go out and catch some sunlight. Great conversation, Bastian. It was a pleasure having you, and I hope a lot of people get some sort of a prompt just to get started with regulating circadian rhythm with
and really diving into. I really encourage people to I just actually wrote an article today that I'll be posting in a few weeks on our homepage, which just talks about light in general, and I call it the light of life, and it just really encourage people to just create a bit more awareness around light in general and pay more attention to light. It's the source of life. So it's
and we can link the article to the show notes so people can see.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Bastian.
Thank you for your time, Deepa. Really, really appreciate it. It was lovely to connect.
Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show today. Just a reminder that this podcast is for information purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional care by a doctor or otherwise qualified health professional. This information is provided on the understanding that it does not constitute medical or the professional advice or services. If you are looking for personal help on your health journey, do seek out a qualified professional. Please do make your own healthcare decisions based upon your research and in partnership with a qualified healthcare professional. It is in no way intended as medical advice or a treatment or cure for any condition. Be sure to always directly work with a qualified practitioner before making any changes to your diet or lifestyle that may feel out of your realm of comfort or understanding. If you are looking for an allied functional medicine practitioner, do seek out more information on www.phytothrive.com. It is important that you have someone who is qualified and understands your health personally in order to provide adequate care, especially when it comes to chronic health conditions. Be sure to subscribe to the Sleep Whisperer podcast on your favorite podcast app to get each episode as soon as it launches.